Built as a prospective class of electric locomotive for use on the East Coast Mainline, the Class 89, following the failure of its design to warrant a production run of engines, ended up being the sole member of its fleet, but despite its lonely status among the wider British Rail roster, was able to rack up some healthy work during its brief career, and is now destined to see a return to mainline operation as one of the fastest operational preserved locomotives in the world. The Class 89 traces its roots back to the proposed electrification of the East Coast Mainline during the mid to late 1980s, where after nearly 3 decades of debate and various plans, the route from the current end of the wires at Hitchin to Leeds, Doncaster, York, Newcastle and Edinburgh was to be energised with 25 kV AC overhead wires. The electrification of the full line was to be complemented by a new fleet of traction that would replace the existing high-speed passenger trains between London, Northern England and Scotland, with the Intercity 125 sets being capable diesel express trains, which had been introduced from 1977 to replace the 1960s-era Deltics and had worked to revolutionise passenger operations on the route within years of their inauguration. To answer the call for new electric traction, a design specification for the new motive power was outlined by British Rail in 1981, followed in April 1982 by a tender being issued and subsequently awarded in June 1983 to Brush Electrical Machines Limited of Loughborough, with the locomotive required to be of a 6-axle configuration that was capable of a 125-mile-an-hour top speed and had the ability to work freight, passenger and parcels trains interchangeably. However, the wider intentions of British Rail were, at the time, for the upcoming locomotive design to occupy second-tier services on the East Coast below the Premier Advanced Passenger Train or APT, a tilting train project that was meant to be the flagship of high-speed express trains across the UK and was capable of attaining a top speed of 160 miles an hour without the need for major infrastructural upgrades. However, the APT project ultimately collapsed in 1985 after the British government withdrew the project's funds following years of delays and bad press, although regardless of the demise of the APT, the proposed electrification of the East Coast Mainline, which had largely been encouraged by the prospect of the APT scheme, continued to gather pace. The axing of the APT, though, had a profound effect on the specifications required for upcoming electric locomotives for the East Coast Main Line, with this second-tier machine now plunged into the position of primary express motive power, and thus a new design specification was issued by BR in 1985 for the upcoming flagship passenger train to be capable of attaining a 140-mile-an-hour top speed, while at the same time being able to accommodate the potential for retrofitting with tilting mechanisms sometime in the future. Therefore, a further 2 designs emerged to rival Brush Traction's proposal, one being from BR's own Crew Works, which simply considered fitting electric traction motors to the body shell of the proven Class 43 HST power car design, while GEC considered a lightweight high-speed locomotive with matching coaches and a cab control car dubbed a driving van trailer or DVT that would operate in a semi-permanently coupled formation of 8 to 9 coaches, mimicking the proposed production sets for the APT had the project not been scrapped. Ultimately, the proposed electric HST power cars were dropped due to their inability to be used as independent locomotives for the mixed traffic role, eventually leading to a runoff between Brush and GEC's proposal, of which GEC would become victor due to the speed benefits proposed by their locomotive and coaches scheme, with Brush Traction's locomotive being too heavy and too far along in the design process to be retrofitted with tilting capability or a 140-mile-an-hour top speed. Regardless, the prototype of their machine was never cancelled, and thus assembly of the sole unit, now dubbed the Class 89, continued, as subcontracted by Brush to BR's Crew Works, the finalised machine being completed in September 1986, and was subsequently transferred a month later by rail to Derby's Litchurch Lane Works, and then by road to Brush's Loughborough plant for assessment, with extensive static tests and commissioning being undertaken until February 1987, after which it returned to Derby and then to Crewe for acceptance trials by BR. The general design principles of the Class 89 are a 6-axle configuration with 6 DC traction motors, with the main armature current for all the motors being fed from a common thyristor drive, with each motor having an independent field current controller that comprises a 2-quadrant chopper inside a thyristor bridge, with the locomotive being capable of developing a total power output of over 6,000 horsepower, which was able to drive the 105-ton machine to a top speed of 125 miles an hour. The Class 89, for its passenger use, was provided electric train heating or ETH so as to make it compatible with modern forms of coaching stock, while a time division multiplex or TDM system of control, in which signals are sent through the standard Railway Clearinghouse lighting jumper cables in order to allow operation of the locomotive from a cab control car, was installed in preparation for push-pull operation with the upcoming fleet of DVTs that were to complement both the Mark III and later Mark IV passenger rakes. Returning to crew, 89001 was promptly put to work on test trains north to Carlisle, though it sometimes ventured south of Crewe to Rugby, and was usually in the company of the Department of Mechanical and Electrical Engineers or DM&EE's Mark III test car No. 10, while further to its trials, the locomotive was often coupled to BR's proposed export variant of the Mark III coach, dubbed the BREL International coaches, so as to test the high-speed performance of this future rolling stock, with the Research and Development Division's Lab 6 Prometheus test car also being present for mainline pantograph performance tests. 89001 was eventually transferred to the Old Dalby test track in April 1987 to evaluate its pantograph aerodynamics, and was tested at up to 100 miles an hour, the maximum speed of the Class 47, which was used to propel the locomotive, the engine, while seeing no future in production, illustrating many advanced design qualities that would later find their way into Brush Traction's various upcoming products, including the Class 9 Eurotunnel locomotives that power the cross-channel vehicle shuttle trains, and the extremely powerful Class 92 dual-voltage locomotives that were designed specifically for channel tunnel freight operations. 89001 would continue to undergo various trials at Crewe, Derby and Old Dalby for the remainder of 1987 and into 1988, when in May of that year it was transferred to Europe alongside Class 150, 150-263 from Cardiff Canton Depot in Wales, Class 90, 90-008, two BREL International coaches, and one of its successors for the premier East Coast Mainline Express locomotive, Class 91 No. 91003, in order to partake in the International Transport and Traffic Exhibition or IVA 88 exhibition in Hamburg, West Germany. The locomotive was dragged in convoy to Dover, shipped to France aboard the Dover to Dunkirk train ferry, and then onwards through France, Belgium, the Netherlands and West Germany to Hamburg, with the exhibition of these locomotives in stock lasting from May 25th to June 15th, 1988, after which the trains were returned to Britain. Beyond its engagement in Europe, 89001 had begun testing on the energised sections of the East Coast Mainline ahead of the first Class 91s during 1988, conducting a variety of additional trials from its base at Bounds Green Depot in North London, in conjunction with 8 Class 43 power cars that had been converted to surrogate driving van trailers due to delays in delivering the brand new Mark IV coaches. 89001 hauled its first passenger train on July 3, 1988, when it worked a special charter from London to Doncaster as part of the 50th anniversary celebrations for LNER A4 Mallard's record-breaking run, followed by it undertaking its first regular passenger services from July 15th between London and Peterborough, usually on semi-fast diagrams hauling Mark II and Mark III coaches. The locomotive also had the distinction of being the first official electric passenger service from London King's Cross to Leeds on August 12th, after which it would be a regular performer on this particular service for the remainder of its career, again in the company of Class 43 power cars and Mark III coaches, as Mark IVs would not become available until October 1989 and was slow to see widespread employment on various diagrams. In January 1989, the locomotive was repainted from its original Intercity Executive livery into a stylish variant of the latest Intercity Swallow colours, prior to it being named Avocet at a special ceremony held at Sandy Station on January 16th, during which the notoriously anti-rail Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher did the honours of unveiling its new moniker in recognition of the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds or RSPB charity that is based in the small Bedfordshire town. 89001 would continue in service on London to Leeds expresses, as well as on London to Grantham semi-fast peak hour workings, but due to its one-off nature, and thus a severe lack of spare parts, reliability for the machine was a running battle between the locomotive and the repair crews at Bounds Green, with 89001 often being found out of use as it underwent overhaul, this pattern continuing until late 1990, when due to the combination of a number of minor faults, and with the Class 91s now almost fully deployed on a full electric schedule, British Rail considered there to be no further use for the Class 89, and it was laid up at a remote siding at Bounds Green Depot awaiting an uncertain future. With British Rail seeing no value to the locomotive, and with Brush Traction having no obligation to take back the engine since BR had purchased it outright in 1987, it was expected that this one-off machine was destined to face the scrapman's torch, though eventually, in 1992, a group of engineers from Brush, seeing the potential of this nearly new 125-mile-an-hour locomotive, privately purchased the engine from BR and had it moved to the Midland Railway Centre at Butterley as a means of preserving it for possible future use. In fading intercity swallow livery, 89001 would become a frequent guest at various open days across the UK network throughout the 1990s, and would remain at Butterley until early 1996, after which the Brush engineers would have the engine taken back to Loughborough in order to undertake restoration of the machine during their own time, working evenings and weekends to gradually put the locomotive back into a serviceable state, with the intention of potentially allowing its use on ad hoc leases to future private railway operators, as the former BR network was carved up among various new franchises. The need for the Class 89 would appear in late 1996, as following its awarding of the Intercity East Coast franchise, the Great North Eastern Railway, or GNER, was determined to see an overhaul of various endemic traction faults with the Class 91s that had seen pervasive reliability issues in these machines since their introduction back in 1988. GNER, in conjunction with the Class 91's owners, Eversholt Rail, would undertake a major improvement scheme that would see these problems rectified, but in the interim gave rise to the requirement for additional traction to be drafted in so as to cover for the shortfall in Class 91s, with the Class 89, being 125 mph capable and recently returned to working order, being bought wholesale from Brush Traction and fully restored at a cost of £100,000, with the engine being shorn of its Avocet nameplate and repainted into GNER's crisp and stylish corporate midnight blue and orange livery prior to its return to revenue-earning service in March 1997, this time solely on the London to Leeds and Bradford Foster Square services with 2 out-and-back journeys per day. While the Class 89 worked well in covering for the shortage of Class 91s, its unique condition was again a problem for its continued use in revenue service, with the locomotive working without problems until 1998, after which a series of minor faults saw the unit return to Brush for repair work that kept it out of use for nearly a year, returning to work with GNER in late 1999, followed by its removal from service again due to a serious failure in early 2000, which saw it back at Loughborough for another overhaul. During this time, the machine saw its white GNER lettering painted gold as per the corporate direction of the private rail operator, and 89001 was put back to work with GNER in the summer of 2000, until it was finally struck down in early 2001 by yet another series of technical problems that ended the machine's mainline career, being placed briefly in storage at Doncaster before finally moving south to Bounds Green, where it was used as a static carriage power supply during 2002. GNER's need to put the Class 89 back into service was no longer necessary, as from May 2000, a contingent of 14-car Class 373s from the failed regional Eurostar service had been drafted in on London to York and Leeds trains, together with the leased Class 90 from freight operator EWS. Moved to Doncaster, 89001 was briefly put on public display at the 2003 Doncaster 150 Open Day celebration, though its future was threatened when the former Doncaster Works was sold off for real estate development, thus meaning GNER needed to find a new home for the locomotive, with the company approaching the AC Locomotive Group, who saw the engine move by road to their Barrow Hill Roundhouse site in Derbyshire on December 17, 2004. Here it would remain until October 2006, when GNER put the locomotive up for sale, and was subsequently purchased in December of the same year by the AC Locomotive Group, following a highly successful fundraiser campaign, the locomotive being restored to its original Intercity executive colours in 2007, followed by a long period of repairs over the next 13 years to see the engine return to an operational state. Assisted by Locomotive Services Limited, or LSL, who seek to use the locomotive for their own charter services using a rake of Intercity liveried Mark III coaches and a DVT, 89001 returned to power at the Soho Traction Depot in Western Birmingham on November 15, 2020, moving on its own for the first time since its crippling failure in early 2001, and after final testing at the former Brushworks in Loughborough, the engine was towed to Crewe in August 2024 for further work in preparation for its return to the main line. Finally, on September 29, 2025, 89001, in the company of 90001, ventured out onto the main line under its own power for the first time since 2001, working a series of late-night runs between Crewe and Stafford, marking the culmination of over 2 decades of dedicated work to return this unique machine, once destined for the scrapyard after only a few years of service, to the high iron of the permanent way, settling in nicely with LSL's other fleet of Class 86, 87 and 90 locomotives. Overall, the lonely life of the Class 89 is one peppered with both success and failure, as the machine was ultimately the product of an obsolete design specification, thus rendering any potential long-term future for the model void before it had even left the factory, while its short service career was mired in a lack of spares and eventual failure. 89001's success, however, came through both its unique nature and the legacy it was able to provide through more successful derivatives in the form of the Eurotunnel Class 9 and the Class 92 freight locomotive. While due to this engine being the very definition of one of a kind, it has proven itself to be a darling of the preservationist movement, seeing it saved from the scrapman on multiple occasions, and is now destined for a bright future in 125-mile-an-hour charter service as the fastest preserved electric locomotive in regular UK mainline operation.